I was standing in the rain outside Rosewood Manor when my daughter Eliza's future mother-in-law approached me with a smug smile. "The bride doesn't want you here," she said, handing me a torn invitation. "Family only." I simply nodded, pulled out my master key ring, and watched her face crumble as I unlocked the grand entrance. "Interesting policy," I replied, "considering I've owned this estate for 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The journey to that rainy confrontation began 3 years earlier. My phone lit up with Eliza's name, a rare occurrence since she'd moved to Westlake with her boyfriend Garrett. I answered immediately, heart leaping with hope that maybe, just maybe, this call would be different. "Mom, I need your help," she said, her voice crackling with excitement rather than the usual cool distance. "Garrett proposed last night." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely happy for her despite the complicated history. "I'm so thrilled for you both." "We're planning the wedding for next June," she continued. "I've always dreamed of getting married at Rosewood Manor. You know, that historic estate on Lancaster Hill. But it's impossible to book less than 2 years out, and it's way beyond our budget." I gripped the phone tighter, my breath catching. Of all the venues in the city, she'd chosen that one. The universe has a peculiar sense of humor sometimes. "No, we haven't been close," she continued, her voice softening with rare vulnerability. "But you always said you'd help with my wedding someday. This would mean everything to me." "I'll see what I can do," I promised, already knowing exactly what strings I could pull. What Eliza didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that Rosewood Manor had been my project for the past 15 years. After my divorce from her father, I'd taken my settlement money and made the riskiest investment of my life, purchasing a crumbling historic estate that everyone said would bankrupt me. I'd restored it room by room, turning it into the most sought-after wedding venue in 3 counties, all while operating under the business name Lancaster Hill Properties, rather than my own. I had my reasons for the secrecy. After the divorce, when Eliza was just entering her teenage years, my ex-husband Victor had filled her head with stories about my supposed financial incompetence. "Your mother couldn't manage a checkbook if her life depended on it," he'd told her repeatedly. "Thank goodness I'm handling your college fund." The irony was painful. While Victor was driving luxury cars and taking lavish vacations with his new wife Diane, I was quietly building a business empire centered around Rosewood Manor, pouring every penny of profit back into restorations and expansions. I now owned 3 historic properties, all operating as premium event venues. The following week, I invited Eliza for coffee at a little cafe near her apartment. She arrived 15 minutes late, preoccupied with her phone. "I spoke with the manager at Rosewood," I said carefully. "They've had a cancellation for next June, the 18th. They're holding the date for you." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "That's impossible. They have a 2-year waiting list. How did you manage that?" "I know the owner," I said simply. "And about the cost. Consider it my gift to you. Everything's covered." Instead of gratitude, suspicion clouded her face. "Everything? That place costs a fortune. How could you possibly afford that?" There it was, Victor's influence. The assumption that I was still the financially struggling single mother I'd been in the years right after the divorce. "I've done well for myself," I said carefully. "I'd like to do this for you." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "That's actually really generous, Mom. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "But I should warn you, Garrett's mother, Vivian, is very involved in the planning. She has specific ideas about everything." That was my first warning, though I didn't recognize it then. Over the following months, Vivian Montgomery became an increasing presence in the wedding preparations. A wealthy widow who treated her only son Garrett as the center of her universe, She had definite opinions about the wedding, and about me. The planning meetings at Rosewood should have been joyful occasions. Instead, they became battlegrounds. Marion, my event director who knew I was the owner, would throw me concerned glances as Vivian steamrolled over every suggestion I made. Eliza wants classic white roses, not those gaudy peonies you keep suggesting, Vivian would say, despite Eliza never having expressed such a preference. The ceremony should be on the west lawn, not the rose garden, she insisted, overruling the venue's most popular setting. Each time, I bit my tongue. This was Eliza's day, not mine, I reminded myself. But as the months passed, I noticed something troubling. Eliza was disappearing before my eyes, her own wishes and preferences subsumed by her future mother-in-law's domineering presence. Sweetheart, I ventured carefully after one particularly difficult meeting. Are you sure this is the wedding you want? It seems like Vivian is making most of the decisions. Eliza's face hardened instantly. Vivian has experience with these things. She knows what's best. Unlike you, she's actually been part of high society her whole life. The words stung, but I recognized them for what they were. Not Eliza's voice, but the same judgmental tone Victor and now Vivian used when speaking about me. Then came the dinner that changed everything. We've revised the guest list, Vivian announced casually over dessert at her country club, sliding a folder across the table. We needed to make some cuts to accommodate Garrett's father's business associates. I opened the folder and froze. My name had been crossed off every list: the ceremony, the reception, even the rehearsal dinner. In the margin, in elegant handwriting, mother of bride, financial contribution only, no attendance. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. It's not a mistake, Garrett said awkwardly, unable to meet my eyes. We just think it would be easier this way. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to object, to stand up for me. Instead, she studied her plate intently. Eliza? I asked quietly. Is this what you want? It's complicated, Mom, she finally murmured. Dad and Diane will be there, and you know how tense things get. And Vivian has invited some very important people. We can't risk any scenes. I see. I closed the folder and stood up. If that's your decision, I'll respect it. But I think we should discuss a few logistical details about Rosewood Manor. It was time to reveal who really owned the venue that was about to become the battleground for a wedding I was no longer invited to attend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was a moment of heavy silence after I mentioned the logistical details about Rosewood Manor. Vivian's perfectly manicured hand reached for her water glass, her diamond bracelet catching the light. What details could possibly concern you? She asked with thinly veiled contempt. The venue coordinator handles everything. Your financial contribution is appreciated, of course, but hardly gives you any say in the arrangements. I took a deep breath, considering my options. I could reveal everything right then, watch their faces as they realized the truth. But something held me back. Maybe it was the decades-old habit of proving myself through actions rather than words. Or perhaps it was the faint hope that Eliza might still stand up for me without external pressure. I should speak with the coordinator directly, I said finally, gathering my purse. Enjoy your evening. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting back tears that refused to fall. When had my relationship with my daughter become so transactional? When had I become someone she could simply cross off a list? The next morning, I called Marion, my event director at Rosewood. She'd been with me since the beginning, helping transform the crumbling estate into a premier venue. They've uninvited me to the wedding, I said without preamble when she answered. What? Marion's shock echoed through the phone. But you're the mother of the bride, and you're the… They don't know that part, I reminded her. And I'd like to keep it that way, for now. Olivia. Marian's voice softened, using my first name instead of her usual professional, Ms. Reynolds. This is beyond inappropriate. Should I tell them we can't host the event? I considered it for a moment. How easy it would be to simply cancel, to have Marian inform them that Rosewood was suddenly unavailable. But that felt petty, like something Victor would do. No, I decided. The wedding proceeds as planned, but I need you to do something for me. Over the next week, I threw myself into work. Besides Rosewood, I managed the restoration of Harrington House, a Victorian mansion that was becoming our second premier venue, and was finalizing the purchase of Lakeside Pavilion. Work had always been my refuge, the place where my competence couldn't be questioned or belittled. 7 days after the dinner, my phone rang with Eliza's number. I steeled myself before answering. "Mom," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "Something weird is happening with Rosewood." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "The coordinator, Marian, says all our plans need final approval from the owner before proceeding," she explained. But when Vivian demanded to speak with them directly, Marian said the owner only communicates through her. It's so frustrating. Vivian had everything arranged perfectly. I bit back a retort. Vivian's perfect arrangements had included moving the ceremony to the West Lawn despite June temperatures regularly hitting the 90s, and replacing Rosewood's signature farm-to-table menu with generic catering from her country club. That does sound frustrating, I said carefully. "What would you like me to do?" "Could you talk to your contact?" "The person who got us the venue in the first place?" Eliza asked. "Vivian says we might need to find another location if they're going to be this difficult." Part of me wanted to let them try. Good luck finding another venue of Rosewood's caliber with just 4 months until the wedding. But I reminded myself this wasn't about winning or losing. "I'll see what I can do," I promised. "But Eliza, can I ask you something?" "What?" Her wariness was palpable even through the phone. "Is this really the wedding you want? Not what Vivian wants or what your father thinks is appropriate. What you want." The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. "I don't know anymore," she finally whispered, her voice suddenly sounding much younger. "Everything's gotten so complicated." After we hung up, I made another call, this one to my attorney, Rebecca Goldman. "I need to know my options," I explained, after outlining the situation. "Legally, can they exclude me from an event at my own property?" Rebecca's response was measured. "Technically, as owner, you have the right to be present on your property at any time. However, if you've entered into a contract for the venue's use, the terms of that contract would govern the situation." "We haven't signed the final contract yet," I told her. "Just the initial booking agreement." "Then you have considerable leverage," she concluded. "But, Olivia, are you sure this is the approach you want to take? Using your position as venue owner to force your way into your daughter's wedding?" Her question gave me pause. Was that what I was doing? Using Rosewood as a bargaining chip? The thought made me uncomfortable. I'd built my business with integrity, never using my position for personal gain or manipulation. "I don't want to force anything," I said finally. "I just want the chance to talk to my daughter without Vivian's interference." The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next day, Marian called to inform me that Vivian and Garrett had scheduled an impromptu visit to Rosewood to resolve these ridiculous obstacles, as Vivian had put it. Eliza would be joining them. I arrived at Rosewood an hour before their scheduled appointment, taking a moment to walk the grounds as I often did when making important decisions. The rose garden was beginning to bloom, pale pink buds unfurling in the spring sunshine. This had always been Eliza's favorite spot as a child, during those rare visits when Victor would allow her to accompany me to that old wreck of a house I was foolishly pouring money into. I remembered her at 9 years old, spinning among the rose bushes, declaring that someday she would live in a castle just like this one. Those were the days before Victor's remarriage, before Diane entered their lives with her country club connections and social aspirations, before Eliza began to see me through their judgmental eyes. I was still standing among the roses when I heard the crunch of gravel announcing their arrival. Marian would usher them into the main house, giving me a few more minutes of solitude. From where I stood, I could see them emerge from a sleek black SUV, Vivian first, imperious in a cream-colored suit, followed by Garrett in business casual, attire that seemed at odds with his normally relaxed personality. Finally, Eliza stepped out, her face tense, shoulders hunched slightly forward in a posture I recognized from her childhood. It was the way she held herself when caught between conflicting expectations. I watched them enter the house, then took a steadying breath and followed. It was time to put an end to this charade, one way or another. Whatever happened next would determine not just my presence at the wedding, but the future of my relationship with my daughter. As I approached the mansion's grand entrance, I could already hear Vivian's voice echoing through the foyer, demanding to speak to the owner immediately. Marian's professional tone responded that she would see if the owner was available. My hand hesitated on the ornate door handle. Once I stepped through, there would be no going back. I pushed open the heavy oak door, the familiar creak announcing my presence. The grand foyer of Rosewood Manor fell silent as I stepped inside. Marian caught my eye from behind the reception desk, giving me a subtle nod of encouragement. "Mrs. Montgomery," I said calmly, addressing Vivian first. "I understand you wanted to speak with the owner of Rosewood Manor." Vivian turned, irritation evident in her tight smile. "Olivia, this is hardly the time for a social visit. We're in the middle of resolving some complications with the venue." "I'm aware," I replied, moving further into the foyer. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor, a feature I'd spent months restoring myself, on my hands and knees, when I couldn't afford to hire specialists. Eliza stepped forward, confusion clouding her face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The tension in her posture, the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she unconsciously positioned herself between Vivian and me, as if preparing to mediate another conflict. "I'm here because I was asked to help with the venue situation," I said carefully, "and because I think it's time for some honesty between us." Vivian made a dismissive gesture. "Whatever issues you and Eliza need to work through can wait. We have more pressing matters to address. The owner of this venue is being utterly unreasonable about our perfectly reasonable requests." The West. Lawn ceremony in June heat? The imported flowers that will wilt in hours? The outside catering that violates our sustainability policies? I countered, my voice remaining calm despite the anger building inside me. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "How would you know about those details?" Marian stepped forward, professional as always, but with a slight smile playing at her lips. "Ms. Reynolds is quite familiar with all the operations at Rosewood Manor." "Reynolds?" Garrett spoke for the first time, looking confused. "I thought the company was called Lancaster Hill Properties." I took a deep breath. Lancaster Hill Properties is the parent company, named after the hill where Rosewood Manor stands. I founded it 15 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost see the gears turning in Vivian's mind as she processed this information, her eyes darting around the opulent foyer as if seeing it for the first time. "You own this place?" Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Rosewood Manor. Harrington House, and we're closing on Lakeside Pavilion next month." "That's impossible," Vivian scoffed, though her confidence was clearly shaken. "These properties are worth millions. You were just a housewife before the divorce." The old insult, one Victor had used repeatedly, no longer had the power to hurt me. I was never just anything, Vivian. I had a business degree I never used during my marriage because Victor preferred I stay home. When that marriage ended, I invested my settlement in this property when everyone, including your future son-in-law's father, said it would bankrupt me. I turned to Eliza, whose face had gone pale. I never told you because I wanted to succeed, or fail on my own terms, not have my accomplishments diminished as luck or dismissed as foolishness, the way your father always diminished me. But Eliza looked around the grand space as if seeing it with new eyes. All those years you struggled to make ends meet after the divorce. The first 5 years were incredibly difficult, I acknowledged. Every penny went back into this place. I lived in the caretaker's cottage at the back of the property. Still do, actually. I worked 18-hour days. There were times I had to choose between paying my health insurance premium or fixing the plumbing. Marion nodded, adding, I remember finding Ms. Reynolds up on the roof in a thunderstorm, patching leaks herself because we couldn't afford to call a contractor. Why didn't you tell me? Eliza asked, and for the first time in years I heard genuine hurt in her voice rather than dismissal. I met her gaze directly. When would I have told you, Eliza? During the weekends when your father suddenly had important plans that meant canceling my visitation? Or maybe during college, when you were too busy to come home during breaks? Or perhaps at one of the family holidays I wasn't invited to after your father remarried? The hurt in her eyes deepened, but I couldn't stop now. Years of silenced feelings were finally finding their voice. Every time I achieved something with this business, I thought about calling you, sharing the news. But then I'd remember how you looked at me when your father mocked my little project, how you laughed along when Diane called it my expensive hobby. After a while, it seemed easier to keep my successes to myself than to have them diminished by the people who should have been proudest. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. So when we asked about having the wedding here, I arranged it, yes, and I offered to cover all expenses as my gift to you both, I confirmed, despite knowing that your mother has been undermining me at every turn. Vivian's face hardened. This changes nothing. The contract is with Lancaster. Hill Properties, not with you personally. Our arrangements stand, including the guest list. I smiled, feeling strangely calm. Actually, Mrs. Montgomery, no contract has been signed yet. Just the initial booking agreement, which gives the owner discretion to approve all final arrangements. You're threatening to cancel your own daughter's wedding? Vivian asked incredulously. Not at all, I replied. The venue is absolutely available to Eliza and Garrett. But I will not be treated as a vendor providing a service rather than the mother of the bride. And I certainly won't be excluded from my daughter's wedding in my own home. Eliza looked from me to Vivian, then to Garrett, who seemed to be shrinking under the tension in the room. Could everyone please give my mother and me a moment alone? Eliza finally asked, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. Vivian immediately objected. Absolutely not. Whatever needs to be said can be said in front of family. I am her family, I said quietly but firmly. Mother. Garrett's tone surprised everyone, including me. Let's give them space. Marion can show us the west lawn while they talk. Vivian's mouth tightened into a thin line, but after a pointed look from her son, she reluctantly allowed Marion to escort them out through the side door, leaving Eliza and me alone in the foyer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner, another piece I'd restored myself, ticked loudly in the silence. Why didn't you just tell me when I called about the venue? Eliza finally asked. I moved to one of the antique benches along the wall and sat down, suddenly exhausted. Would it have mattered? Or would you have just found another venue to exclude me from? Her face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked quietly. Eliza? When was the last time you made a decision that wasn't influenced by your father, or Diane, or now Vivian? When was the last time you stood up for me? or even for yourself. She sat beside me on the bench, leaving a careful distance between us. It's complicated. Dad and Diane have expectations. Garrett's family moves in important circles. There's always so much pressure to do things the right way. And the right way includes cutting your mother out of your wedding? The hurt I'd suppressed for so long bled into my voice. You and Dad can't be in the same room without tension, she said defensively. And Vivian said it would be awkward to explain your circumstances to her friends. My circumstances, I repeated flatly. You mean the fact that I work for a living instead of living off alimony? Or perhaps that I choose to live simply and reinvest in my business rather than flaunting wealth like your father and Diane? Eliza didn't answer immediately. Her gaze traveled around the magnificent foyer, taking in details she'd previously overlooked. The hand-carved banister I'd spent a winter restoring, the crystal chandelier I'd rewired myself, the antique tapestries I'd carefully cleaned and preserved. I never knew, she said finally. All these years, I thought. You thought what your father told you to think, I finished for her. That I was financially irresponsible, that I was barely getting by, that I needed to be managed and controlled and kept at a distance to avoid embarrassing you. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't want your apology, Eliza, I said, my voice softening despite myself. I want my daughter back, the one who used to have her own thoughts and dreams before everyone else started telling her who she should be. Eliza wiped away her tears, with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that it made my heart ache. For a moment, I could see the little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix anything. I don't even know what my own thoughts are anymore, she admitted quietly. Every decision becomes a committee meeting between Dad, Diane, Vivian, and now Garrett. Sometimes I feel like I'm just watching my life happen. I resisted the urge to reach for her hand. We weren't there yet. Including your wedding? The day that should be most about what you want? She laughed bitterly. Especially the wedding. Do you know I wanted a simple ceremony? Maybe on a beach somewhere with just close family and friends. But Dad said it wouldn't be appropriate. For his daughter. Diane insisted I needed a society wedding to establish the right connections. And Vivian? She trailed off, shaking her head. What about Garrett? Doesn't he have any say in his own wedding? Eliza's silence told me everything. I needed to know. He's just like me, she finally said. The path of least resistance. It's easier to go along with his mother than to fight her. We both learned that lesson early. The side door opened, and Vivian strode back in, clearly having run out of patience. Garrett and Marion followed, looking resigned and apologetic, respectively. I've given you quite enough time for your little heart-to-heart, Vivian announced. Now, we need to finalize these arrangements. If you're actually the owner, Olivia, then surely you understand that business is business. Our deposit has been paid, and we expect our contract to be honored as discussed. I stood up, feeling strangely calm. Actually, Vivian, no deposit has been processed yet. I instructed Marion to hold the check until certain matters were resolved. What? Vivian's voice rose sharply. That's completely unprofessional. We gave you that check 3 weeks ago. Yes, right after you informed me I wasn't welcome at my daughter's wedding, I replied evenly. I wanted to be certain before making any final commitments. Vivian's face flushed red. This is outrageous. We've already sent invitations. Garrett's father has invited business associates from across the country. Do you have any idea how this will look if we have to change venues? Now? I'm not suggesting you change venues, I clarified. Rosewood Manor is still available for Eliza and Garrett's wedding. I'm simply clarifying the terms under which that will happen. And those terms include forcing yourself into an event where you're not wanted? Vivian shot back. Before I could respond, Eliza stood up. Stop it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Vivian turned to her, eyebrows raised. Excuse me? I said, stop it, Eliza repeated, louder this time. Stop speaking to my mother that way. Stop pretending you know what I want. Just stop. Oh. Surprise on Vivian's face would have been comical under different circumstances. Eliza, darling, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the time for emotional outbursts. We need to be practical. Practical? Eliza laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged foyer. Is that what we're calling it now? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like bullying. You've been undermining my mother. From day one, making snide comments about her finances, her clothes, her lifestyle, all while she was successful enough to own the very venue you're so desperate to book. Garrett stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on Eliza's shoulder. Eliza, maybe we should discuss this privately. She shrugged him off. No, I'm done with private discussions that somehow always end with me doing what everyone else wants. She turned to face me directly. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stood up for you long before now. The simple apology, delivered with such sincerity, nearly broke my composure. Well, this is all very touching, Vivian interjected, clearly uncomfortable, with losing control of the situation. But it doesn't change the facts. We have a wedding to plan, with or without Rosewood Manor. Without, Eliza said firmly. The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. What did you say? Vivian asked, her voice dangerous. I said without, Eliza repeated. This isn't the wedding I want. It never was. Garrett looked stricken. Eliza, I don't mean I don't want to marry you, she clarified quickly. I mean I don't want this production your mother has been orchestrating. I don't want a wedding where my own mother isn't welcome. I don't want to start our marriage with this much manipulation. Vivian's face hardened. Garrett, it's time to leave. Clearly, Eliza is having some sort of breakdown. We'll discuss this when she's thinking more rationally. I'm thinking more rationally than I have in years, Eliza countered. For the first time, I'm making my own decision, not just going along with what everyone tells me I should want. Garrett looked from his mother to Eliza, conflict evident in his expression. Then, to my surprise, he moved to stand beside Eliza. She's right. Mother, he said quietly. This wedding has become something neither of us recognizes. Vivian's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. Finally, she gathered her composure and said coldly, I see. Well, when you both come to your senses, you know where to find me. But don't expect me to keep rearranging my schedule for this charade. With that, she turned on her heel and marched out the front door, letting it slam behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Marian cleared her throat. I'll just be in my office if anyone needs me, she said tactfully, retreating down the hallway. Once we were alone, Garrett exhaled loudly. Well, that was terrifying. A laugh bubbled up from Eliza's chest, unexpected and genuine. Did you see her face when Mom said she owned Rosewood? I thought she was going to faint. Or spontaneously combust, Garrett added, and suddenly all three of us were laughing, the tension of the confrontation breaking like a fever. When our laughter finally subsided, Garrett turned to me with a seriousness I hadn't seen from him before. Ms. Reynolds? Olivia? I owe you an apology, he said earnestly. I should never have allowed my mother to exclude you from our wedding. It was wrong, and I was a coward for not standing up to her. I studied him thoughtfully. Perhaps there was more to this young man than I'd given him credit for. Thank you, Garrett, I said simply. But I think your fiancé deserves an apology even more than I do. He nodded, turning to Eliza. He's right. I'm sorry, Eliza. I've been letting my mother run roughshod over both of us because it was easier than fighting her. That stops today. Eliza's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed like tears of relief. We both need to get better at standing up for ourselves and for each other. I watched them, This young couple suddenly, finding their voices, and felt a surge of hope that had been absent for a long time. "So," I said after a moment, "what happens now?" Eliza looked around the magnificent foyer of Rosewood Manor, then back at me. "Now, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what kind of wedding we actually want. One where both our mothers are present, but neither is in charge." Garrett nodded emphatically. "Agreed, though my mother might need some time to adjust to the new reality." "And what about your father?" I asked Eliza gently. "And Diane? They're still expecting the society wedding of the season." A shadow passed over Eliza's face. "That's going to be a difficult conversation. Dad has always been influential in my decisions." "You mean controlling?" I corrected, unable to help myself. To my surprise, she nodded. "Yes, controlling. Just like Vivian is with Garrett. I'm only now seeing the pattern." Garrett squeezed her hand supportively. "We can face them together, all of them. Your dad, Diane, my mother, even my father if he bothers to fly in from Singapore for more than the actual ceremony." I watched them, these two young people finding their strength together, and felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in my daughter for finally standing up for herself, hope for their relationship, now that they were choosing to face these challenges as a team. And yes, a touch of lingering hurt that it had taken such an extreme situation for Eliza to see the truth about how she'd allowed herself to be manipulated and how she'd hurt me in the process. "We still want to get married at Rosewood," Eliza said, turning to me, "if you'll still have us. But we want to start fresh, plan a wedding that actually reflects who we are and what we want. And most importantly," Garrett added, "we want you there. Not just as the venue owner, but as the mother of the bride, in the front row where you belong." Their sincerity was evident, but years of disappointment had taught me caution. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But what happens when your father objects, Eliza? Or when Vivian inevitably tries to take control again? Will you stand firm then too?" The question hung between us, a test I hadn't planned but needed answered nonetheless. Eliza and Garrett exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that couples develop over time. It was Eliza who finally spoke. "I can't promise we won't falter," she said honestly. "We've both spent years giving in to stronger personalities. That doesn't change overnight. But I can promise we'll try harder than we ever have before." Her candor was refreshing, if not entirely reassuring. "And if that's not enough," I pressed, "if trying doesn't work?" Garrett straightened his shoulders. "Then we'll try again, and again, until we get it right." I studied them both, wanting desperately to believe this transformation was real and lasting. "Perhaps we should test that resolve sooner rather than later," I suggested. "Your mother is undoubtedly calling your father right now," I said to Eliza, "filling him in on today's drama. And Garrett, I imagine your mother is already plotting her next move." As if on cue, Eliza's phone began to ring. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and held it up so we could see the caller. "Addie's dad." "Perfect timing," I murmured. Eliza's finger hovered over the screen, her newfound confidence visibly wavering. Then she took a deep breath, put the phone on speaker, and answered. "Hi, Dad." "What the hell is going on?" Victor's voice boomed through the speaker, as commanding as ever. "Vivian Montgomery just called me, absolutely livid. Something about your mother interfering with wedding plans and you having some kind of public meltdown." I watched Eliza flinch at her father's tone, saw the automatic impulse to placate him flash across her face. "Old habits die hard. There was no meltdown, Dad," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "We had a frank discussion about the wedding plans and who's making the decisions." "Frank discussion?" Victor scoffed. "Vivian says you humiliated her in front of the venue staff and threatened to cancel the wedding. Do you have any idea how this looks? The Montgomerys are not people you want as enemies, Eliza." I didn't threaten to cancel the wedding, Eliza clarified. I said I didn't want the wedding Vivian was planning. For God's sake, Eliza. Victor's exasperation was palpable. Vivian is graciously lending her expertise to ensure this wedding is appropriate for someone of your standing. You should be grateful. My standing? Eliza echoed. What does that even mean, Dad? It means you're my daughter. It means you're marrying into the Montgomery family. It means certain standards must be maintained. He paused, then added with clear distaste. Vivian mentioned your mother was there. I should have known she'd be behind this. I bit my tongue, letting Eliza handle this herself. Mom didn't put me up to anything, Eliza said firmly. But yes, she was there. Because, as it turns out, she owns Rosewood Manor. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear Victor's shocked breathing. What did you just say? He finally managed. She owns Rosewood Manor, Eliza repeated. And Harrington House. And she's about to close on Lakeside Pavilion. She's built a successful business while you've been telling me for years that she's financially incompetent. Another long pause. That's ridiculous, Victor finally said, but his certainty had wavered. She must be exaggerating. Those properties are worth millions, I interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Hello, Victor. Yes, I'm here. And yes, I own all 3 properties through my company, Lancaster Hill Properties, the same company you called a pipe. Dream that would bankrupt me 15 years ago. Olivia. His voice turned cold. Still inserting yourself where you don't belong, I see. Actually, Eliza cut in before I could respond, I invited Mom to be part of the planning. She's the mother of the bride. Of course she belongs. And let me guess, Victor said with heavy sarcasm, now she's using her position as venue owner to force her way into a wedding that we've spent months planning carefully. How typically manipulative. I felt the familiar burn of indignation rising in my chest, but Garrett spoke before I could. With all due respect, sir, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. No one is manipulating anyone. Olivia offered us the venue as a gift for our wedding. She never tried to use it as leverage until she was explicitly uninvited from her own daughter's wedding, which frankly was an appalling decision that I regret being part of. I blinked in surprise. Perhaps I had underestimated Garrett after all. Victor's tone turned dismissive. Listen, young man, you don't understand the history here. There are reasons why certain arrangements were made. Eliza's mother has a habit of making scenes and embarrassing herself in public. We were simply trying to avoid any unpleasantness on your special day. The only unpleasantness, Eliza said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion, has been watching. My father and future mother-in-law systematically exclude my mother from one of the most important days of my life. And I'm done with it. Eliza, Victor's voice turned cajoling, the tone he always used when he wanted to appear reasonable while maintaining control. I understand you're upset. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Diane's making your favorite lasagna. We can discuss this calmly, like adults, without your mother's influence. I watched my daughter's face, saw the familiar pull of her father's manipulation, the way she automatically began to soften. Then she squared her shoulders. No, Dad, I'm not coming to dinner so you and Diane can talk me back into a wedding I don't want. Either you support the decisions Garrett and I make about our own wedding, or you don't need to be involved at all. The threat hung in the air, bold and unprecedented. You don't mean that, Victor said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. This isn't like you, Eliza. Maybe it should be, she replied. Maybe I should have started standing up for myself, and for Mom, years ago. This is your mother talking, Victor accused. She's filling your head with, goodbye, Dad. Eliza interrupted, her finger hovering over the end call button. When you're ready to listen instead of accuse, let me know. She disconnected the call and let out a long, shaky breath. Well, I said into the silence that followed, I'd say that was a successful first test of your resolve. A small, proud smile flickered across Eliza's face. I've never stood up to him like that before. How does it feel? I asked. Terrifying, she admitted. But also, right. Garrett put his arm around her shoulders. It was definitely right, and impressive. Just then, Garrett's phone began to ring. He pulled it out, grimaced at the screen, and held it up. Mother. Round 2, I guess. You don't have to answer, Eliza told him. He shook his head. No, I do. We both need to stand our ground, or nothing will change. He accepted the call, but didn't put it on speaker. Hello, Mother. Even without speakerphone, Vivian's voice was loud enough for us to hear her tirade, though not the specific words. Garrett listened patiently, his expression growing more resolved with each passing moment. Mother, he finally interrupted, I understand you're upset, but Eliza and I have made our decision. We're still getting married at Rosewood, but the wedding will be planned by us, not by you or anyone else. More angry squawking from the phone. Yes, Olivia will be there. As the mother of the bride, she'll be seated in the front row and will be part of all the traditional mother of the bride activities. He paused, listening. No, this isn't negotiable. If you can't accept our decisions, then perhaps you should reconsider your attendance. Eliza's eyes widened at his boldness. I love you, Mother, but I'm marrying Eliza, not you. Our wedding will reflect our wishes. Another pause. I need to go now. We can talk more when you're calmer. He ended the call and pocketed his phone, looking simultaneously drained and empowered. I've never spoken to her that way, he said, echoing Eliza's earlier words. 2 rebellions in one day, I observed. Impressive. Both of them looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if shedding the weight of others' expectations had physically unburdened them. What happens now? Eliza asked, her voice small but steady. I considered the question carefully. Part of me, the hurt, vindictive part, wanted to savor this moment of vindication, to watch Victor and Vivian struggle with their loss of control. But the wiser part knew that wasn't the path forward. Now, I said thoughtfully, we figure out what kind of wedding you two actually want. Not what your parents want, not what society expects, but what would make this day meaningful for you. Eliza looked around the grand foyer of Rosewood Manor. I've always loved this place, even before I knew it was yours, Mom. But maybe not for the reasons everyone assumes. What do you mean? I asked. Everyone sees Rosewood as this grand, prestigious venue, she explained, perfect for showing off wealth and status. But what I've always loved about it is how it feels like it has a soul. Like there's real history and love in the bones of this place. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. That's exactly why I bought it. Everyone else saw a crumbling money pit. I saw potential in history worth preserving. Like mother, like daughter, Garrett observed with a small smile. So maybe, Eliza continued, warming to her theme, our wedding should honor that. Not some flashy society event, but something that celebrates history, craftsmanship, and things built to last. Including your relationship, I added. She nodded, her eyes bright with emerging possibilities. Exactly. A wedding that's about substance over show, quality over quantity. I love it, Garrett said enthusiastically. And I love that you love it. This is the most excited I've seen you about our wedding in months. The 3 of us moved from the foyer to the garden terrace, where Marian thoughtfully brought us tea. As the afternoon light softened, Eliza and Garrett began to reimagine their wedding, piece by piece. Gone were Vivian's imported orchids, replaced by seasonal flowers from Rosewood's own gardens. The formal sit-down dinner for 300 became an intimate gathering for 80, featuring the venue's farm-to-table cuisine. The guest list would need dramatic revision. The ceremony location moved from the impractical West Lawn to the rose garden Eliza had loved since childhood. With each change, I watched my daughter become more animated, more present, more herself. I sipped my tea and listened, offering suggestions only when asked. This was their wedding to plan, their vision to create. My role now was to support, not direct, a balance I was still learning myself. But beneath the tentative joy of this new beginning, I couldn't help wondering how long this newfound independence would last once the full weight of family pressure descended upon them. Victor and Vivian had backed down temporarily, but they wouldn't surrender control so easily. The real test was yet to come. The next morning, I woke early in my cottage at the back of the Rosewood property. The caretaker's residence was modest. Compared to the manor house, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a kitchen with windows overlooking the kitchen garden. But it was home. I'd chosen to stay here even after Rosewood became profitable, preferring to invest in the business rather than upgrade my living situation. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone rang. To my surprise, it was Garrett. "Olivia," he said, sounding harried. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," I assured him. "Is everything all right?" He sighed heavily. "Not exactly. My mother has been busy. She's rallied reinforcements." "What kind of reinforcements?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "The financial kind," he replied grimly. "My father called from Singapore last night. Apparently he's cutting off my trust fund access if we don't proceed with, and I quote, the wedding that befits a Montgomery." I winced. "I'm sorry, Garrett. That's a significant threat." "It's worse than you think," he continued. "I've been using that fund to bootstrap my tech startup. Without it, we'll lose our office space and I'll have to let my employees go. 5 people depend on me for their livelihoods." This was exactly the kind of pressure I'd feared. Victor and Vivian were too practiced at control to give up without deploying their full arsenal. "What does Eliza say?" I asked. "She doesn't know yet," he admitted. I didn't want to wake her. She was so happy yesterday, finally planning the wedding she actually wants. I hate to destroy that. My respect for Garrett notched higher. Despite his own crisis, his first concern was for Eliza's happiness. "You need to tell her," I advised gently. "You're partners now, remember? That means facing these challenges together." "I know," he agreed. "But I also called because, well, I could use some advice. You built your business from nothing after your divorce. You didn't have family money to fall back on. How did you do it?" The question caught me off guard. No one in my daughter's circle had ever shown interest in my business acumen before. "It wasn't easy," I said honestly. "I worked multiple jobs at first, consulting for small businesses during the day, bartending at night. I lived on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I learned every aspect of property restoration myself to save on labor costs." "That sounds incredibly difficult," Garrett said quietly. "It was," I acknowledged, "but also empowering. Every success was truly mine. No one could claim I'd achieved it because of family connections or inherited privilege." He was silent for a long moment. "I've never had to build anything without a safety net before." "Are you willing to try?" I asked, the question more pointed than I'd intended. "I think I have to be," he replied, surprising me again. My father's ultimatum made something very clear to me. As long as I depend on his money, I'll never be truly independent. He'll always have this leverage over me. "That's a hard but valuable realization," I said. "Which brings me to the second reason I called," Garrett continued. "I've been thinking about Rosewood and your other properties. You must need investors for your expansion plans. What if I diverted what remains of my trust fund into your business instead of my startup? A legitimate investment with proper returns." My father couldn't object to a sound financial decision. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "Garrett, that's unexpected." "I know it's sudden," he rushed on. But I've been researching Lancaster Hill properties since yesterday. Your revenue growth is impressive. Your debt-to-equity ratio is solid, and the hospitality industry in this region is projected to grow by 18% over the next 5 years. It's actually a better investment than my tech venture, at least in the short term. I appreciate the vote of confidence, I said carefully. But I don't want to come between you and your father. That could create more problems for you and Eliza. That's just it, Garrett said, his voice gaining strength. I'm tired of letting my parents dictate my choices through financial control. This wouldn't be just about the wedding. It would be about taking a step toward true independence, for both Eliza and me. I was still formulating a response when my doorbell rang. Setting my mug down, I moved to the front window and peered out. To my utter astonishment, Victor's sleek black Mercedes was parked in my driveway. "Garrett, I need to call you back," I said quickly. "Something's come up." "Is everything okay?" he asked. "My ex-husband just arrived at my door," I replied, unannounced and very much uninvited. "Oh," Garrett said, sounding alarmed. "Do you want me to come over, or call Eliza?" "No," I decided. "Let me handle this. We'll talk more about your proposal later." After hanging up, I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple cotton loungewear, and opened the door before Victor could ring again. "This is a surprise," I said flatly, making no move to invite him in. Victor stood on my porch in an impeccably tailored suit, looking as polished and commanding as ever. His hair had more silver at the temples than the last time I'd seen him, but otherwise, he appeared unchanged, the same confident posture, the same slightly condescending smile. "Olivia," he said, as if we were colleagues meeting at a business function. "May I come in?" "That depends on why you're here," I replied. His smile tightened. "I think you know why. Our daughter has suddenly turned her wedding upside down, and you seem to be at the center of it." "Eliza is making her own decisions about her wedding," I corrected. "And she's a grown woman, so the our daughter angle isn't going to work on me." He sighed with exaggerated patience. "Can we please have this conversation inside, like civilized people?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside to let him enter. My cottage was clean and comfortable, but deliberately modest. I watched him, take in the simple furnishings, the well-worn sofa, the bookshelves made from reclaimed wood. His subtle disdain was palpable. "You could afford better than this now, couldn't you?" he observed, gesturing around the room. "If what Eliza says is true about Rosewood and the other properties, I choose to live simply," I said. "Unlike some people, I don't feel the need to flaunt my success." His eyes narrowed at the implied criticism. "Let's cut to the chase, Olivia. What's your angle here? Using your position as venue owner to manipulate Eliza? Trying to drive a wedge between her and the Montgomerys to satisfy some petty revenge fantasy?" The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. My angle was trying to give our daughter the wedding venue of her dreams as a gift. I never mentioned owning Rosewood until I was explicitly uninvited from my own daughter's wedding. "Yes, the uninvitation," he said, waving dismissively. "Perhaps that was tactless, but you must understand how these things work in certain circles. The Montgomerys have a reputation to maintain. A reputation more important than human decency, apparently," I observed. Victor paced my small living room, his frustration evident. "This isn't about decency. It's about social standing, connections, the kind of doors that open for Eliza through this marriage. Surely you can see beyond your hurt feelings to what's best for her future. What's best for her future is learning to stand up for herself and the people she loves," I countered. "Not being bullied into submission by controlling parents, including her father." He stopped pacing to face me directly. "Is that what this is about? Some misguided attempt to empower her? She was perfectly happy with the wedding plans until you interfered." "Was she?" I challenged. "Or was she just doing what she's always done, trying to please everyone else at the expense of her own happiness?" Something flickered in Victor's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or a moment of uncomfortable recognition. Look, he said, his tone softening into the persuasive voice he used to close business deals. We both want what's best for Eliza. And the fact is, this wedding has implications beyond just one day of celebration. The Montgomerys are influential people. Their connections could advance Garrett's career, which benefits Eliza too. So your concern is purely selfless, I said skeptically. He ignored my sarcasm. What if we reach a compromise? You attend the wedding, front row, as mother of the bride should be. We acknowledge your business success. Everyone saves face. And Eliza and Garrett give up the wedding they actually want to have, the one you and Vivian Montgomery have orchestrated. That's not a compromise, Victor. That's surrender with a consolation prize. His facade of reasonableness cracked slightly. You're being deliberately difficult. The invitations have already gone out to over 300 guests, including the governor and 2 state senators. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it would be to suddenly change everything? More embarrassing than excluding the mother of the bride from her own daughter's wedding? I asked pointedly. More embarrassing than discovering the financially incompetent ex-wife you've belittled for years actually owns the prestigious venue you're so desperate to use? Victor's face flushed with anger. I always knew you were stubborn, Olivia, but I never thought you'd stoop to using our daughter's wedding as a battleground for old grievances. That's rich coming from you, I retorted. You've been using Eliza as a pawn in your campaign to erase me from her life since our divorce. And now you're threatening to cut off Garrett's trust fund if they don't comply with your demands. He had the grace to look startled. How did you... Eliza and Garrett talk to each other now, I explained. Novel concept, I know. Partners sharing information instead of manipulation and threats. Victor's expression hardened. The trust fund. Issue is between Garrett and his father. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me when it's being used as leverage to exclude me from my daughter's wedding, I said firmly. And when it affects Eliza's happiness. He stepped closer, his voice dropping dangerously. Let me be very clear, Olivia. This wedding will proceed as planned. If you continue to encourage Eliza in this rebellion, you'll regret it. I have resources and connections you can't imagine. I held my ground, looking him straight in the eye. Are you threatening me, Victor? Because that would be a serious mistake. Not threatening, he said smoothly. Simply stating facts. Did you know that Lancaster Hill Properties has been flagged for potential zoning violations at Lakeside Pavilion? Or that there's talk of a historical preservation review of your renovation work at Harrington House? These processes can be lengthy and expensive. Bad for business. The implicit threat was unmistakable. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the morning. You would really go that far? I asked quietly. Use your political connections to target my business because your daughter wants to plan her own wedding? I would do whatever necessary to protect Eliza's future, he replied. The question is, would you risk everything you've built over something as trivial as wedding aesthetics? I looked at this man I had once loved, the father of my child, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. The handsome face and confident demeanor that had once seemed attractive now revealed something darker. A ruthlessness I had always known was there but had never fully acknowledged. Get out of my house, Victor, I said coldly. And understand. This. I built my business from nothing while you and Diane were mocking my efforts. I survived your attempts to turn our daughter against me. I will certainly survive whatever petty regulatory harassment you can arrange. His smile was chilling. We'll see about that. Give my best to Eliza. With that parting shot, he walked out, closing the door with deliberate gentleness that was somehow more threatening than a slam would have been. I stood motionless in my living room, anger and anxiety battling within me. Victor hadn't made idle threats. He did indeed have the connections to create serious problems for my business. The Lakeside Pavilion purchase was particularly vulnerable, with financing contingent on certain zoning approvals. My phone rang again, startling me from my thoughts. It was Garrett once more. Olivia? How did it go with Victor? I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Let's just say it confirmed my ex-husband hasn't changed. He's still willing to use whatever leverage he has to get his way. Did he threaten you? Garrett asked, surprisingly perceptive. In a manner of speaking, I admitted. He implied he could create regulatory problems for my business if I continued to encourage Eliza's rebellion, as he put it. Garrett was silent. For a moment. This is getting out of hand, he finally said. Our parents are willing to go to extreme lengths to control this wedding. And by extension, to control you and Eliza, I added. About my proposal earlier, Garrett said, his voice firmer now. I'm serious about investing in Lancaster Hill properties, not just as financial protection for myself, but as a show of solidarity with you. If our parents want war, let's give them one worth fighting. His determination surprised and touched me. Perhaps I had misjudged him after all. Let me think about it, I said cautiously. It's a significant decision for both of us. Of course, he agreed. But don't take too long. I have a feeling things are about to escalate. As I hung up, I stared out my kitchen window at Rosewood Manor gleaming in the morning sun. I had built this business from nothing, turning a crumbling estate into a thriving enterprise through sheer determination and countless hours of sweat and tears. I wasn't about to let Victor or anyone else take it away from me if he wanted a fight. He would get one. But first, I needed to talk to Eliza. I stood at my cottage window for several minutes after Victor left, trying to calm my racing thoughts. His threats weren't empty. He had the connections to create serious problems for my business. The Lakeside Pavilion purchase was particularly vulnerable, with financing contingent on specific zoning approvals that could easily be derailed by the right word in the right ear. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Can we meet? Just the two of us. Of course, I replied immediately. Coffee at Rosewood in an hour? Her response came quickly. Perfect. See you then. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit that reflected the business owner I was, rather than the struggling ex-wife Victor had painted me to be for so many years. As I walked from my cottage to the main house, rehearsed what to tell Eliza about her father's visit. The truth, certainly, but how much of it? She was already waiting in the garden terrace when I arrived, hair pulled back in a messy bun, dressed in jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger than her 27 years. For a moment, I glimpsed the little girl who used to run through these gardens before divorce and influence had pulled her away from me. You look worried, she said, as I sat across from her at the wrought iron table where Marion had thoughtfully set out coffee and pastries. Your father paid me a visit this morning, I admitted. Her expression darkened. I was afraid of that. What did he want? To convince me to stop encouraging your rebellion, as he put it, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. He wants the wedding to proceed as originally planned. Of course he does. Eliza sighed, stirring her coffee absently. He called me last night after I hung up on him. He was persuasive. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Persuasive how? She met my eyes directly. He reminded me of everything the Montgomerys could do for Garrett's career, how this wedding would cement our place in certain circles, how connections matter more than sentimentality. And what did you tell him? I asked, trying to keep the tension from my voice. A small, defiant smile played at her lips. I told him that my mother taught me the value of building something meaningful on my own terms, even if he didn't realize it until now. Relief and pride washed through me. I'm impressed. Don't be too impressed, she cautioned. It wasn't easy, and I nearly caved. Dad has always known exactly which buttons to push with me. She paused, her expression growing serious. Garrett told me about his father threatening to cut off his trust fund. I nodded. He mentioned that to me as well. Did he also tell you about his idea to invest in your business instead? He did, I confirmed. It's an unexpected proposal. Eliza studied me carefully. What do you think about it? I chose my words, with care. I think it's a bold move that could have significant consequences, both positive and negative. The question is whether those consequences are worth it to you both. That's not really an answer, she observed with a hint of the directness I'd always valued in her before others taught her to soften her edges. You're right, I acknowledged. The honest answer is that I'm torn. Professionally, Garrett's investment could accelerate my expansion plans. The capital would help secure Lakeside before Victor can interfere with the zoning approvals. But, personally? She prompted. Personally, I'm concerned about creating another point of conflict between you and your father, and between Garrett and his parents. I don't want to be the catalyst for more family discord. Eliza laughed, though there was little humor in it. Mom, that ship has sailed. We crossed the Rubicon the moment I stood up to Dad and Vivian. Perhaps, I conceded. But there's a difference between asserting independence over wedding plans and deliberately redirecting Garrett's inheritance into a business venture your father has likely already targeted. Her eyes widened. What do you mean, targeted? Hesitated, but honesty seemed the only viable path forward. Your father implied he would create regulatory problems for my properties if I continued to support your revised wedding plans. He threatened your business? Eliza's voice rose in disbelief. In so many words, I confirmed. The Lakeside acquisition is particularly vulnerable right now, her face flushed with anger. That's beyond controlling. It's vindictive. It's who your father has always been, I said gently. He views the world as a series of transactions and power plays. Anyone who challenges his authority becomes an opponent to be neutralized. Like you did during the divorce, she said quietly. Nodded. He couldn't control me anymore, so he did the next best thing. He controlled how I saw you, Eliza finished, the realization dawning in her eyes. All those comments about your financial incompetence, your unreliability, your foolish business venture, were designed to diminish me in your eyes, I confirmed. And they worked, for a long time. She reached across the table and took my hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact in years. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen through it. You were 13 when we divorced, I reminded her. A child caught between warring parents. Your father was the one with the big house, the stable lifestyle, the social standing. It was natural to align yourself with the parent who seemed to have everything under control. Her grip on my hand tightened. But at what cost? I've spent years molding myself to fit other people's expectations, Dad's, Diane's, and now Vivian's. I'm not sure I even know who I am anymore. I think you're starting to figure it out, I said, squeezing her hand in return. The woman who stood up to Victor and Vivian yesterday? That's the real Eliza, the one I've always seen, even when you couldn't see her yourself. Her eyes filled with tears. I want to be that person all the time, not just in moments of crisis. I want to build something meaningful like you did, instead of just riding on Dad's connections or Garrett's family name. Then do it, I encouraged. Start with this wedding. Make it authentically yours no matter who objects. And after the wedding? She asked. What then? Dad won't stop trying to control us. Neither will Vivian. One battle at a time, I advised. But if you're serious about building your own path, Garrett's investment idea might be worth considering, not to spite your father, but as a first step toward financial independence for both of you. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. Garrett mentioned that you've been considering a small event space focused on artist showcases and literary events. He thinks it could be a perfect adjunct to your current properties. I blinked in surprise. He's done his research. He's more strategic than people give him credit for, Eliza said with a small smile. Everyone sees him as Vivian's compliant son, but there's steel beneath the surface. We're both tired of living under our parents' thumbs. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marian, looking slightly harried. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, addressing me directly. "But Mrs. Montgomery is at the front entrance, demanding to speak with you. She's threatening to call her attorney if we don't accommodate her immediately." Eliza groaned. "Vivian." "It was only a matter of time," I observed, rising from my chair. "The question is, do we face her together or separately?" My daughter stood, squaring her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of my own that it made my heart ache. "Together," she said firmly. "I'm done letting other people fight my battles." As we walked through the gardens toward the main house, I felt a curious sense of calm. Whatever Vivian Montgomery had planned, she would find herself facing not one, but two Reynolds women, both finally ready to stand their ground. Vivian Montgomery stood in the grand foyer of Rosewood Manor, a vision of controlled fury in a dove gray, St. John knit suit and pearls the size of small marbles. Her silver-streaked blonde hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, not a strand out of place despite what was clearly a hastily arranged visit. Marian hovered nearby, professional but watchful. As Eliza and I entered from the garden entrance, Vivian's eyes narrowed, taking in our united front with visible displeasure. "Well," she said crisply, "isn't this cozy? Mother and daughter, conspiring to destroy months of careful planning." "Good morning to you too, Vivian," I replied evenly. "What can we help you with today?" Her gaze swept dismissively over me before landing on Eliza. "I've come to speak sense into my future daughter-in-law. Garrett is being unreasonable about this ridiculous wedding upheaval, and I suspect your influence is the reason why." Eliza stepped forward, her posture relaxed but determined. "Garrett is being clear about what we both want, Vivian. There's a difference." "What you want," Vivian scoffed, "is to alienate both your families on a whim. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? The governor has already confirmed his attendance. The Harrington Foundation board members have arranged their summer schedules around this date." "The date isn't changing," I interjected calmly, "and the venue remains the same. The only changes involve the scale and style of the celebration, making it more intimate and authentic to who Eliza and Garrett are." Vivian's perfectly manicured hand fluttered dismissively. "Intimate is a polite word for cheap. The Montgomerys do not do intimate weddings." "The bride and groom aren't only Montgomerys," Eliza pointed out, "and Garrett agrees with the changes." "Garrett," Vivian said with exaggerated patience, "is temporarily confused by your sudden rebellion. He'll come around once he realizes what he stands to lose." "Are you referring to his trust fund?" I asked bluntly, tired of the verbal fencing, because he's already well aware of that particular threat. Something like surprise flickered across Vivian's face before she composed herself. "That's a family matter and none of your concern." "It concerns my daughter," I countered, "which makes it very much my concern." Vivian's lips thinned to a barely visible line. "This situation has become absurd. First, you manipulate your way into a wedding where you're clearly not wanted by playing the owner card. Now you're encouraging these children to throw away years of family tradition and social standing for some rustic fantasy." "Actually," came a male voice from the doorway, "we're throwing away years of family control for a chance at genuine happiness. There's a difference." We all turned to see Garrett standing in the entrance, his usually affable expression replaced by something harder and more resolved. Beside him, to my shock, stood Rebecca Goldman, my attorney. "Garrett," Vivian exclaimed, momentarily flustered by his appearance. "What are you doing here? And who is this woman?" Garrett stepped forward, moving to stand beside Eliza. "I had a feeling you'd make a move like this, Mother, trying to isolate Eliza and pressure her while I was meeting with my father's financial advisors." "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian protested, though the slight flush on her cheeks betrayed her. "I simply wanted to speak with Eliza woman to woman about the practical aspects of these changes she's proposing." "Of course," Garrett replied skeptically. Just like Dad simply wanted to discuss cutting off my trust fund unless we proceed with the wedding exactly as planned. Your father, Vivian said stiffly, is concerned about your future. These impulsive decisions have consequences. Yes, they do, Garrett agreed. Which is why I've just transferred the remainder of my trust fund, approximately $2.3 million, into a new investment account. He turned to me. Olivia, I'd like to formally present my offer to become a minority investor in Lancaster, Hill Properties, specifically for the Lakeside Pavilion acquisition and the new arts venue initiative. The room fell silent. Vivian's face went from flushed to ashen in seconds. You did what? Rebecca Goldman stepped forward, portfolio in hand. I've drawn up the preliminary paperwork, Ms. Reynolds. If you're ready to proceed, we can finalize the details this afternoon. I looked from Rebecca to Garrett in astonishment. You've been busy this morning, he smiled grimly. I learned from my father that in business, speed often determines success. Once I realized he was serious about the trust fund, I knew I had to move quickly before he could freeze the accounts. This is outrageous, Vivian spluttered. You cannot possibly be serious about investing your inheritance in her? She gestured, vaguely at me. Wedding venue business. It's a hospitality and events property group, Garrett corrected, with an exceptional growth rate and revenue stream. As an MBA, I recognize a sound investment when I see one. Your father will never allow this, Vivian warned, reaching for her phone. He'll stop the transfer immediately. He can try, Garrett replied with surprising calm. But it's done, Mother. The money has moved from the trust to my personal accounts to the investment escrow. Dad may be powerful, but even he can't reverse completed transactions without cause. Ms. Goldman has ensured everything is perfectly legal. Rebecca nodded professionally. The documentation is impeccable. Vivian turned to me, eyes blazing. You put him up to this. This is nothing but a vindictive ploy to drive a wedge between my son and his family. Actually, I countered, this is the first I'm hearing about the completed transfer. Garrett mentioned the idea yesterday, but I advised careful consideration before making such a significant decision. It's true, Garrett confirmed. This was my decision, not Olivia's. She actually encouraged me to think about the potential family fallout before proceeding. Vivian's composure was rapidly crumbling. Eliza, she appealed, changing tactics. Surely you can't support this reckless behavior? Your father will be furious when he hears about this. Think of your future, of the connections you'll lose. I watched my daughter carefully, recognizing this as another critical moment of truth. The Vivian Montgomerys of the world were experts at exploiting moments of uncertainty, at driving wedges between allies. Eliza took Garrett's hand, interlacing her fingers with his. I think my future looks incredibly bright, actually. I'm marrying a man who's willing to stand up for what matters to us, even at great personal cost. This isn't standing up, Vivian snapped. It's throwing away your inheritance out of childish spite. No, Garrett replied firmly. It's investing in something I believe in, both professionally and personally. He turned to face me directly. Olivia has built something remarkable here, something authentic and meaningful. I'd rather be part of that than continue living under my father's financial control. I felt a swell of unexpected emotion. This young man, whom I'd initially dismissed as spineless, was showing more courage than many seasoned business people I'd encountered. We should continue this discussion in my office, I suggested, gesturing toward the east wing. Marion could. You bring refreshments for everyone, including Mrs. Montgomery if she wishes to join us. Vivian's face contorted with barely suppressed rage. This isn't over, she hissed. When William hears about this— He already has, Garrett interrupted, holding up his phone to display a string of increasingly angry text messages. He's threatening to disown me, sue me, and destroy Lancaster Hill Properties in that order. Rebecca. Goldman smiled thinly. I look forward to seeing him try. Interfering with a legitimate business transaction would constitute tortious interference. Not to mention the potential RICO implications if he follows through on his threat to Victor Reynolds about manipulating zoning approvals. Vivian's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" "Oh," Rebecca said with calculated innocence. "I assumed you knew." Victor Reynolds visited Olivia this morning, threatening to create regulatory problems for her business unless she convinced Eliza to revert to the original wedding plans. Fortunately, I had our conversation recorded for my case notes. It was a bluff. I hadn't recorded my conversation with Victor, but Vivian didn't know that. The uncertainty that flashed across her face was deeply satisfying. "Marion," I said calmly, "perhaps we should make that refreshment order to go. I think Mrs. Montgomery needs some time to process these developments." Vivian gathered the tattered remains of her dignity, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "This isn't the end of this discussion. When you both come to your senses, you'll regret burning these bridges." "Perhaps," Eliza conceded, "but I think we'll regret surrendering our independence more." As Vivian stormed out, the massive oak door closing behind her with a satisfying thud, an unexpected laugh bubbled up from my chest. Part relief, part disbelief, part genuine amusement. "Well," I said, turning to the three people remaining in the foyer. "That was certainly dramatic, even by wedding planning standards." Garrett's serious expression finally cracked into a grin. "You should see how she reacts when someone serves the wrong wine with fish." The tension broken, we all laughed. A cleansing moment of shared humor that somehow felt more intimate and binding than any business transaction or wedding plan could be. But as our laughter faded, I found myself wondering about the inevitable fallout. Victor and William Montgomery were not men who accepted defeat graciously. The battle might be won, but the war was far from over. After Vivian's dramatic exit, the four of us, Eliza, Garrett, Rebecca, and myself, relocated to my office in the key east wing of Rosewood Manor. Unlike the grandeur of the main house, my workspace was deliberately understated. Exposed brick walls, a reclaimed wood desk, and large windows overlooking the rose garden. It was a space that balanced the historic charm of Rosewood with practical functionality, much like the business philosophy that had guided Lancaster Hill Properties from the beginning. Rebecca spread the investment documents across my desk. "I've structured this as a minority stake with specific provisions for the Lakeside Pavilion project and the proposed arts venue. Garrett would hold 15% equity in those specific properties, but without management control. That gives you capital without interference," Garrett explained, "while giving me the investment protection and legitimate business involvement that my father can't easily challenge." I studied the preliminary agreement, impressed by the thoroughness. "You've thought this through carefully." "I started researching yesterday after our conversation," Garrett admitted. "But things accelerated this morning when my father issued his ultimatum. Rebecca was kind enough to meet me on short notice." "We've known this was coming," Rebecca said with a slight smile. "Victor's tactics are nothing if not predictable." I glanced at Eliza, who had been unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about? All this?" She met my gaze steadily. "I'm thinking that for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm making decisions instead of just accepting other people's plans for me. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. It's also going to get more difficult before it gets easier," I cautioned, not wanting to dampen her newfound determination, but needing to be realistic. Victor and William aren't going to simply accept defeat and move on. "We know," Garrett said grimly. "My father's texts have graduated from threats to explicit promises of retribution. He's on a flight back from Singapore as we speak. And my father will undoubtedly join forces with him," Eliza added. "They're too similar not to recognize each other as natural allies." Rebecca gathered her papers with practiced efficiency. "Which is precisely why we need to move quickly. I suggest we finalize this agreement today and file the necessary paperwork immediately. The sooner Garrett's investment is legally secured, the fewer options they'll have for interference." Agreed, I said, making a decision. Marion can witness the signatures. I'll have my financial team prepare for the transfer. As Rebecca and Garrett discussed the finer points of the agreement, Eliza moved to stand by the window, gazing out at the gardens where wedding ceremonies were typically held. I joined her, keeping my voice low. Having second thoughts? She shook her head. Not about standing up to Dad and Vivian. Not about redesigning the wedding. But I am worried about the aftermath. What concerns you most? I asked. That they'll make us pay for this independence for years to come, she admitted. Dad knows how to hold a grudge, and from what I've seen of William Montgomery, he's cut from the same cloth. I couldn't disagree. That's a valid concern. Men like Victor and William view the world as a zero-sum game. Every defeat must be avenged. Every challenge to their authority punished. How did you deal with it all those years? She asked. The constant undermining, the disparagement of your business, the attempts to control your relationship with me? The question caught me off guard. For so long, I'd maintained a careful separation between my struggles as Eliza's mother and my identity as a businesswoman. Now those worlds had collided irrevocably. I compartmentalized, I admitted. I channeled all my anger and hurt into building Rosewood. Every nasty comment about my little project became fuel for working harder, proving him wrong through success rather than argument. That sounds lonely, Eliza observed quietly. It was, I acknowledged, but also empowering. Victor could control the narrative about me in your life, but he couldn't stop me from creating something meaningful on my own terms. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the office door. Marion entered, her professional demeanor slightly strained. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's a situation developing at the main entrance. Victor Reynolds and William Montgomery have both arrived. They're demanding to speak with all of you immediately. Garrett's head snapped up from the documents. My father is here? Already? That's impossible. He was in Singapore this morning. He chartered a private jet, Marion explained. Landed at the regional airport 40 minutes ago and came straight here. They're both quite insistent on being admitted. Rebecca stood, gathering her papers. Perfect timing. Let them wait while we finalize this agreement. Nothing like a little additional motivation to expedite matters. I glanced at Eliza and Garrett, both of whom looked slightly ill at the prospect of the confrontation to come. Are you two ready for this? Because once we sign these papers, there's no going back. Victor and William will view this as an act of war. Garrett straightened his shoulders. I've spent 29 years trying to meet my father's expectations. I'm done living my life on his terms. Eliza nodded in agreement. And I'm done being the pawn in Dad's games. Whatever happens next, at least it will be our choice. Marion, I instructed, tell Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Montgomery that we'll meet them in the main reception room in 30 minutes. Offer them refreshments and inform them that we're concluding important business matters. Make that 45 minutes, Rebecca amended with a calculating smile. Let them stew a bit. Men like that aren't accustomed to waiting on others' timetables. Marion left to deliver the message. I turned back to the documents on my desk. Let's finish this then. Not out of spite, but because it's the right business decision for all parties involved. The next 40 minutes passed in a flurry of signatures, notarizations, and electronic fund transfers. Rebecca's preparation was impeccable, allowing us to execute the agreement with remarkable efficiency. By the time Marion returned to escort us to the main reception room, Garrett was officially a minority investor in Lancaster Hill Properties, and a significant portion of his trust fund was safely beyond his father's reach. They're getting impatient, Marion warned as we gathered our things. Mr. Montgomery has threatened to call the police if we don't admit them soon. The police? I repeated, incredulous. On what grounds? He's claiming his son is being held against his will and coerced into fraudulent financial transactions, Marion replied, managing to keep a straight face despite the absurdity of the accusation. Garrett actually laughed. That sounds like him. When persuasion fails, escalate to absurd allegations. A tactic Victor has employed more than once, I observed, remembering similar threats during our divorce proceedings. Rebecca tucked the signed agreements into her portfolio. Let them call. I'd welcome the opportunity to explain to local law enforcement how two wealthy businessmen are attempting to interfere with a legitimate transaction between consenting adults. As we walked through the corridors of Rosewood toward the inevitable confrontation, I felt a curious sense of calm. For years, I had avoided direct conflict with Victor, preferring to build my success quietly rather than engage in public battles. But standing alongside Eliza, Garrett, and Rebecca, I realized that some confrontations couldn't and shouldn't be avoided. The massive double doors of Rosewood's reception room loomed before us. Beyond them waited two men accustomed to having their every demand met, their every wish fulfilled, their authority unchallenged. Men who viewed their children not as independent beings, but as extensions of themselves and their legacies. Ready? I asked, my hand on the ornate door handle. Eliza slipped her hand into mine, a gesture of solidarity that meant more to me than she could possibly know. Ready. I pushed open the doors to face whatever storm awaited us on the other side. The reception room of Rosewood Manor had hosted countless gatherings over its long history, elegant dinners, charity functions, wedding celebrations, but perhaps none quite as charged as the confrontation unfolding within its walls that afternoon. Victor Reynolds and William Montgomery stood at opposite ends of an antique Chippendale sofa, presenting a united front despite having met in person only hours earlier. They made a formidable pair. Victor with his silver-streaked dark hair and tailored Italian suit, William with his imposing height and the subtle signs of a hasty trans-Pacific flight evident in his slightly rumpled appearance. Vivian sat primly. Between them, her earlier fury now calcified into icy composure. The tableau they presented was one of wealth, authority, and absolute certainty in their own righteousness. Finally, Victor said as we entered, his voice dripping with contempt, "How generous of you all to grant us an audience." We had important business to complete, I replied calmly, moving to stand before the fireplace. Eliza and Garrett positioned themselves beside me, with Rebecca slightly behind, a silent but potent presence. William Montgomery stepped forward, focusing his attention on his son. "This charade ends now, Garrett. I've spoken with Judge Peterson. We can have this so-called investment agreement nullified by tomorrow morning on grounds of coercion." "There was no coercion," Garrett responded evenly. "I made a sound business decision based on extensive research and financial projections. Ms. Goldman can attest that everything was done properly and legally." "Ms. Goldman," William sneered, "is hardly an impartial witness, and regardless, I had no authority to transfer those funds without consultation. The trust was in my name," Garrett pointed out. "I've been the sole authorized signatory since my 25th birthday. Check the paperwork, Dad. You set it up that way yourself to avoid certain tax implications." A flicker of uncertainty crossed William's face, the first crack in his imperious facade. Victor switched tactics, turning his attention to Eliza. "I expected better from you," he said, his voice softening into the paternal disappointment that had controlled her for so long. "After everything I've done to secure your future, to throw it away on some misguided loyalty to your mother." "This isn't about loyalty to Mom," Eliza corrected him. "It's about Garrett and me making our own choices about our wedding and our lives." "Choices that conveniently benefit your mother's business empire," Victor observed acidly. "An empire I built. Without your help or approval," I interjected. "In fact, despite your active efforts to undermine it." Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, Olivia. Your success, impressive as it may be, doesn't make you invulnerable. I still have considerable influence in this community." "Are you threatening me again, Victor?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Like you did this morning when you implied you'd interfere with my zoning approvals for Lakeside Pavilion. William Montgomery's head swiveled toward Victor, his expression suddenly wary. "What exactly did you promise her, Reynolds?" Victor waved dismissively. "Nothing concrete. I merely suggested that regulatory processes can be unpredictable." "That sounds remarkably like tortious interference," Rebecca observed mildly, stepping forward. "Not to mention potential violations of state ethics laws regarding improper influence over municipal functions." "Nobody's discussing legal action," Victor backpedaled quickly. "This is a family matter that's gotten out of hand." "I agree," Vivian interjected, rising from the sofa with practiced grace, "which is why I propose a compromise." All eyes turned to her, surprised by this apparent olive branch. "The wedding proceeds as originally planned," she continued. "The guest list remains intact, including Olivia, of course. In return, Garrett reconsiders this hasty investment and returns the funds to their proper accounts." Garrett shook his head. "The investment is completed, Mother. The papers are signed, the money transferred." "Papers can be shredded," William countered. "Transfers reversed." "And what happens after the wedding?" I asked, addressing Vivian directly. "Once Eliza and Garrett have complied with your demands, will you suddenly develop a newfound respect for their independence? Or will the control simply continue in new forms?" Vivian's smile was thin. "We're their parents. Our guidance comes from a place of love and experience. Your guidance," Eliza said quietly but firmly, "comes from a place of control." "There's a difference." An uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. The fundamental impasse was clear. Two diametrically opposed views of family, of parenting, of autonomy. There would be no easy compromise because the core values at stake were incompatible. William broke the silence, his voice cold with finality. "If you proceed with this rebellion, there will be consequences. Significant ones." "We're prepared for that," Garrett replied, standing taller. "Financial independence matters more to us than your approval." Victor's face had taken on a calculating expression I recognized all too well. "This isn't just about money, though, is it? It's about connections, opportunities, doors that only open with the right introductions. Are you truly prepared to sacrifice all that?" For the first time since the confrontation began, I saw uncertainty flicker across Eliza's face. This had always been Victor's most potent weapon, not the threat of financial abandonment, but the implied withdrawal of social capital, the connections that opened doors no amount of talent or hard work could easily unlock. I stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on my daughter's shoulder. "Perhaps the more relevant question is whether you're prepared to sacrifice your relationships with your children over a wedding venue and guest list, because that's what's at stake here." Victor flinched almost imperceptibly. For all his faults, he did love Eliza in his own controlling way. "Nobody is suggesting estrangement," Vivian said quickly. "We simply want what's best for them." "What you want," I corrected gently, "is what you believe is best for them. There's a critical difference. Eliza and Garrett are adults who need to chart their own course, even if that course differs from the one you've mapped out." William's jaw tightened. "This philosophical debate is pointless. The fact remains that my son has made a reckless financial decision that needs to be corrected immediately." "Actually," Rebecca interjected, "the investment paperwork has already been filed electronically with the appropriate regulatory bodies. Attempting to force its reversal would trigger automatic reviews that might raise uncomfortable questions about coercion. On your part, not ours." William's face reddened. "Are you threatening me, counselor?" "Not at all," Rebecca replied smoothly. "Simply stating facts. Your son made a legal, thoroughly documented investment decision. Any attempt to forcibly reverse it could be construed as parental interference in an adult's financial affairs." The stalemate hung heavy in the air, neither side willing to concede ground. Then, unexpectedly, Eliza spoke up. "I have a suggestion," she said, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. The wedding will proceed at Rosewood as Garrett and I have redesigned it. Smaller, more meaningful, with both our mothers in attendance and participating as we wish. In return, she paused, taking a deep breath. In return, we'll attend the reception you've been planning at the country club the following evening, with all the society guests and business connections you both value so highly. The proposal hung in the air, unexpected and ingenious in its simplicity. 2 events, one authentic and personal, the other strategic and social. Each side getting what they truly valued most. Vivian recovered first. 2 events? That's highly unusual. But not unheard of, Garrett added, catching on quickly to Eliza's thinking. Many cultures have multiple wedding celebrations. This would allow us to honor both traditions. An intimate ceremony reflecting our personal values, and a larger reception acknowledging our family's social positions. Victor and William exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected compromise. Chew. Investment remains as is, Garrett added firmly. That's non-negotiable, but we're willing to fulfill the social obligations you value, provided you respect our choices about the ceremony itself. And your mother would be present at both events? Victor asked Eliza, eyeing me with lingering distrust. Yes, Eliza confirmed, as would Diane, Vivian, and all parents. This isn't about exclusion. It's about creating space for both authenticity and tradition. I watched the calculations playing out across Victor's and William's faces, the weighing of pride against practicality, of control against concession. These were men unaccustomed to compromise, yet the alternative, a complete rupture with their children, was clearly unpalatable. I could arrange something suitable at the club, Vivian said slowly, already envisioning the possibilities. We'd need to position it carefully, of course. Not as a secondary event, but as an exclusive extension. Of the celebration, the governor and senators could still attend, Victor added, warming to the idea despite himself. The business connections would still be made. And we have the wedding that truly reflects who we are, Eliza concluded. Everyone gets what matters, most to them. The tension in the room gradually dissipated as the details were discussed. Dates, logistics, announcements. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a workable one. A first step toward a new dynamic between these adult children and their controlling parents. As the conversation shifted toward practical matters, I slipped quietly out onto the terrace, needing a moment alone to process everything that had transpired. The afternoon sun bathed Rosewood's gardens in golden light, the same gardens where, in a few weeks' time, my daughter would be married in a ceremony that honored her authentic self rather than others' expectations. I heard the glass door slide open behind me and turned to find Eliza stepping onto the terrace. That was brilliantly handled, I said as she joined me at the stone balustrade. The 2-event compromise. I'm impressed. She smiled, a genuine smile untinged by the anxiety that had shadowed her for so long. I learned from the best. You built this place from nothing when everyone told you it was impossible. That takes both vision and pragmatism. Qualities you clearly inherited, I observed. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunlight play across the carefully tended roses. I wish I'd known sooner, Eliza said finally. About Rosewood, about everything you built. I would have been so proud. You know now, I replied simply. And that's enough. She turned to face me fully. I want to learn about the business, about how you did it. Not because Dad suddenly respects your success or because Garrett's invested in it, but because it's part of who you are, who we are. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. After years of distance, of carefully maintained barriers, my daughter was reaching across the divide, asking to know me, truly know me, perhaps for the first time in her adult life. I'd like that, I managed, my voice slightly husky. There's a lot to show you. Eliza glanced back toward the reception room, where the others were still hammering out details. It won't be simple, you know. Dad and the Montgomerys. They'll accept this compromise for now, but they won't change overnight. Maybe not ever. I know, I acknowledged. But you and Garrett have taken the first step, establishing boundaries, asserting your independence. Everything else builds from there. She nodded thoughtfully. One battle at a time, right? Exactly. The glass door slid open again, and Garrett emerged, looking simultaneously exhausted and relieved. They're leaving, he announced. Temporary truce established, though I suspect they're already plotting their next moves. Undoubtedly, I agreed. But that's tomorrow's problem. He moved to stand beside Eliza, slipping an arm around her waist. Your compromise suggestion was inspired. I should have known you'd find a solution when the rest of us were locked in opposition. We all contribute what we can, she replied, leaning into him slightly. You had the courage to move your inheritance beyond their reach. Mom built this place despite everyone's doubts, and she smiled. I found a way to make peace while preserving what matters most. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, the three of us standing together on Rosewood's terrace, bathed in afternoon light, having weathered the storm together. Different strengths, different contributions, but a unified front against the controlling forces that had shaped our pasts but would not determine our futures. So, I said lightly, breaking the moment before it became too heavy with meaning. A wedding to plan, a business investment to implement, and 2 sets of difficult in-laws to manage. I'd say we have our work cut out for us. Garrett laughed, the sound unforced and genuine. When you put it that way, it sounds impossible. Impossible? I echoed, gesturing around us at Rosewood Manor, the estate everyone had once declared a lost cause, now transformed into a thriving testament to vision and perseverance. I don't believe in impossible anymore. Eliza's hand found mine again, squeezing gently. Neither do I. Standing there with my daughter and her fiancé, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just pride or vindication or even joy, but a sense of possibility stretching out before us. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we would navigate it together, on our own terms. And in the end, that was the victory that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.